Let's start straight away with COVID. 18 months in, what's your response to travel retail's response to COVID?
I've got to say it's mixed, Peter. I think I'm very excited by the recent developments around JD.com and Lagardère, following on the back of probably 12 months ago now, Alibaba and Dufry coming together in a partnership. And yeah, I think there's some critics out there that are saying that it's the online retailer that's taking the lead in that conversation and seeing the opportunities that travel retail can provide. But ultimately, it takes two to tango. And I think there's definitely upside for both parties. So that's exciting. I think on the flip side, there's plenty of airports, retailers and operators that I believe, and some of them have actually quoted it, saying that they're simply waiting for the return. And I think that return has been much longer than many experts initially predicted. And in my view, if you're not moving forward, you're effectively moving backwards. So I have some concern for those businesses and the industry as a result of that.
Yes, I think that's an unhealthy response, if you forgive the pun. So, in real terms, what's actually impressed you most?
Well, I think aside from the strategic partnerships I've just mentioned, I think there are probably three areas that were very rapid in how the industry responded. One was in employee welfare. And I think many companies, people, individuals, we had the hashtag No One Hungry movement from the exec chef at Hamoa in Thailand. Social distancing was the second thing. I think, we had the mini greenhouses at Mediamatic Eaton in Holland, and cute things like the stuffed pandas at Japan Zebu Shibotan Zoo. So I think those two, employee welfare and social distancing. And then the third thing was that I'll say the forced rapid response around digital. So QR codes, apps, customer interfaces. I think that moved pretty quickly. I think we've been talking about that as an industry for years. And I think what COVID has done is it forces people to adopt those.
I mean, have you got any evidence that shows that some of these moves have actually met with customer expectations? And even with the reduced matters, whether or not the average spend per passenger has actually leveled, it's the same, or it's actually increased?
No, I mean, I can only probably go with the same press that you're reading, and many retailers saying that the average spend per head has increased as a result. And to be honest, I'm going to be controversial. I don't believe that it is as a result of any digital or new measures. I think what's happening is people are forced to go to airports much earlier. There's less people in the airports, so that gives you more time to browse and to shop. The brand ambassadors and the service crew actually can now engage. I've flown a few times now, and they're actually engaging with me as opposed to just get the product and scan. And I think a general excitement about traveling again. I think that's really what's driving that spend per head in the airports. Having said that, in the downtown, when we've implemented, I guess, some of these digital technologies, we have seen, on average, a 25 to 30% increase in average check. And a third of that's coming from, I guess, new and repeat purchase. So in the F&B industry, that's people just reordering on their phones because they don't have to go up, they don't see queues, they just move faster. A third is coming from upsell and premiumization. So you're selecting the premium vodka as opposed to the standard one. And a third is coming from, I guess, experimentation. And I guess if you had three burly blokes sitting at a bar, they'd probably order a beer, whereas if they can do it on an app, they might order a pisco sour. So it's actually been quite interesting to see some change in product mix as a result of the digitalization.
Well, so when you're talking about digital innovation, you're not just talking about robots, are you?
No, I mean, digital service robots were kind of introduced in 1983 in a small deli in Pasadena. So it's been around for almost 40 years, and there's plenty of, I'll call it back of house and kitchen technology, with the equipment and even automated inventory and staffing modules and applications, etc. That I guess enhance the business's efficiency. What I'm talking about is the interface with the customer. And I think that's really where the change is happening now. I'm a huge fan of that interaction in F&B and the service, etc. But you've just got to go into a restaurant now and see how the younger generation are having their dinner. I mean, they order online, they sit there with their phones on, they eat, they're talking to their friends who are around the table, and they actually leave, get up, and say goodbye via WhatsApp. It's actually an incredible phenomenon. Now, it's not every restaurant, but it's a lot of restaurants, and it just shows how generationally people have different expectations and different experiences.
So clearly, online has become a critical element. I mean, even for F&B then.
Yeah, I think not as much as retail, but I mean, you just look at the rise of digital and what was it last year, 2020, I think 2 billion people purchased goods online. It was worth US $4.2 trillion. And online food delivery, $300 billion, and 25% of the world's population have used it. These are phenomenal numbers.
Yes.
Doesn't matter which way you look at it. And whilst I agree that there's, I'll say, less risk for F&B versus traditional retail, because ultimately you've still got to eat and drink, ignoring that interface and that interaction is something I'd be very cautious of.
So where then do you see the dividing line between digital convenience and experiential, or is it just a massive blur of that line right now?
But I think we're emerging from the blur, but what we have done, whether it's obvious or not yet, is we've definitely moved to a digital-led world. Simple convenience will ultimately end up the domain of online retail, in my view. And physical retail becomes part of that experience. Probably the best, or one of the best examples, is the Nike Rise store. I mean, this is a 24,000 square foot store in Seoul, which is a combination of physical, digital experiences. You've got RFID tables comparing shoes, etc. But the unique thing, I think, is the final interaction or the purchasing is done on the app, and therefore the transactional part again is digital. It's not physical. So you've got the transactional process online, and then the experiential piece is part physical and part digital. And I think, as an industry, we've got to be a little bit honest with ourselves. Customers don't give a damn about channels. They really don't. And the good companies like Nike realize this. They just want to talk to their customers and get them to engage with the brand, whether that's physical or digital or a combination of both. I don't know any customer that turns around, or any friend that goes, I'm going to go to the retail channel or the travel retail channel. They just go, I want that product, and here's where I'm going to get it.
So importantly, that level of depersonalization doesn't impact sales. It actually, the reverse is true.
I think it increases sales, and I think as an industry, and we've been around it for quite some time, I think we've got to grasp that the generation that are coming through want to be spoken to in a completely different way and want to be engaged in a completely different way, and that's what's going to get them to spend more. It's not the traditional, it's here's everything up on a wall, 3 for 2, those type of environments. I think that the consumer is quite different these days.
And the issue here is whether or not the retailers can play catch up and stay and be on the curve, let alone, as they have been for many years, remain behind it. And it's very difficult given the existing business model that exists at airports, for example. But we'll get onto that later on. Recently, we've seen a measure of integration between food and beverage and retail in some airports. I mean, what do you see emerging from this when it comes to a potentially new commercial model?
I'm glad you've seen it. I haven't seen much of it. I've seen a fair bit moving in the downtown with, Thomas Cafe and in Burberry and Shenzhen and things like The Table, Crate and Barrel in Chicago. Airports less so. That you're right. There are a couple examples that are coming through, but again, this is not new. I mean, think of IKEA. IKEA's been around for ages, and they sell 1 billion meatballs a year, worth $2.5 billion of revenue. 30% of people come to their shops to eat, and they're quoted as saying, or the CEO's quoted as saying that the meatballs are their biggest sofa seller. So that the concept of getting food and retail integrated is not new, and I'm a big fan of it, obviously, but I think it makes sense when you've had a good meal or a good drink or something, you're generally happier. And then when you're happier, you actually spend more, whether that's in retail or F&B. And I think that's something that there's a real opportunity there for airports to touch on, because it doesn't matter if they're happier with the F&B and go back to F&B. I think the bigger opportunity is a happy experience from a dining perspective, gets people to spend more money in the retail perspective. And that's the integration that I think there's the opportunity. In terms of the commercial model, I honestly don't think that's the driver of how the commercial model needs to change. I think it's more this evolution of digital retail is going to drive that. And if we just take the Nike store that I talked about, the Rise, there's plenty of airports I know that would love a Nike flagship in their terminal. But what happens then when the customer is paying on the app for the product that they potentially bought inside the terminal? Does the airport get a slice of that? And maybe that's an easy example. That's probably a yes. What happens if they just do all the experiential piece in store and then order that to be at arrivals when they get to their destination? Who takes a slice of that? Is that the departing airport? Is that the arriving airport? Is it both? And before you ask me, no, I don't have an answer. And I know that the tax authorities around the world are pretty much grappling with the same thing. So, but I definitely think those, particularly those hub airports, need to really think about that.
Just going back to your IKEA example, do you think that the weight of the meatballs determines an assessment of
size of the couch,
the size of the couch, and how soft it might be? Okay.
I'm sure there are some studies on it, Peter.
Okay. Staying with F&B, just how significant a change do you think there's likely to be on airports in the coming years?
Good question. In my heart, I'd love to say there's a significant change in the wings. In my head, I think there's not going to be as big a change as what we would like to see. It really depends on the objectives of the airports, and a lot of them, I've seen many tenders that say, look, we want sense of place, we want local operators, we want the reflecting of downtown. And then on page 2, they say we want an airport operator that's got a turnover or an operator that's got a turnover of over 50 million. I've operated in 5 international airports with 6 international brands. It just doesn't work. So if people, or if the airport operators want traditional, stable, that's fine. That's a strategy, and it's a good strategy. If the airports are true to their word and they want to reflect local and they want something new and exciting, I think there has to be a blend. And we're working with a couple of airport operators that are realizing that. So there is a space for the traditional or the usual suspects, but there's also a space that needs to be carved out for that new or local reflection.
Yeah, but the odds are that most will stay with the usual suspects because they know they've got a guaranteed return. Local is great, but it's also risky.
Local's great, it's risky, and some of the big operators can operate local. It's just that final probably 10% where you really want the local operator's flair. It's usually the person, whether it's a barista, whether it's a chef, whether it's a front of house person. And it's very difficult to recreate that as a corporate. Um, and so therefore, yeah, if I was a betting man, I'd say there's going to be maybe some morphing, but I don't think it's going to be wholesale changes.
But there have been changes elsewhere, haven't there? I mean, notably in Australia's biggest stadium. Just walk us through what's happening there.
Yeah. Just to clarify, it's Australia's biggest stadium precinct, not the biggest stadium. But yeah, ground control. We were engaged by Venues New South Wales, who have the rights and own the Sydney Cricket Ground and now the new $1 billion Sydney Football Stadium redevelopment. And what we saw there early on was a real desire to reflect a sense of Sydney. And there was nothing saying the incumbent wasn't doing a decent job, but what the Sydney Cricket Ground Trust and Venues New South Wales board realised was that consumers have changed dramatically in the last 10 years. Their experiences have changed, their knowledge had changed, and what they also realised was that F&B plays a very significant and important part of the overall experience. On the one hand, you've got all this new digital technology that means you can watch a football game or a netball game or whatever from the comfort of your own home and have thousands of different angles. Why should people be coming to the stadium and forking out their hard-earned cash? And let's face it, the tickets to a game aren't cheap. The F&B in stadiums isn't generally cheap. So how do you then elevate that whole experience? And I think that was the big ticker for us. And you know, we've been able to secure, and I can't give away any commercial details, but arguably Australia's preeminent hospitality operator downtown to come into the stadium and operate that entire precinct. And everyone's incredibly excited about it. We're also quite nervous around certain aspects, but the ability to now go, we've now got Sydney's best operator now operating in a stadium and giving the patrons what they would expect, everyone believes that that is going to drive incremental revenue and an improved fan experience. So, you know, the role of F&B, as I said earlier, is not just about feeding people. It's now about enhancing that overall experience, and that's what's really going to drive the revenues going forward. And it's a great test bed for airports.
Do you want to develop that thought?
Yeah, I think airports are a great opportunity to become a mirror into the city that they're in.
They claim they are.
Many claim they are, and some do a decent job, and some have, you know, restrictive factors that make it difficult. And I get all that, and I understand it. But I really do think that airports have a great opportunity to turn around and go, how do we make this space a great experience for people that are coming, going, or transiting? And part of the solution is the F&B element of it.
So moving on, what do you see as being the future for ghost kitchens and virtual brands?
I think we set aside virtual brands because I don't think they're really relevant outside the delivery channel. And particularly in an airport environment, you've got a few big brands, right? There's the Starbucks, McDonald's, Burger King. They're the big F&B brands. The rest, I'm going to say, are mainly concepts that have been created for a need, whether that's a passenger need or an airport need or something like that. It's more about the concept creation. So virtual brands I don't think really fit in the channel. Ghost kitchens, on the other hand, I think the adaptation of that is a huge opportunity. And, you know, we've spoken before, Peter, where I've said I'm kicking myself going, you know, why did we build outlets, 300, 400 square meter outlets, and dedicate 120 square meters to a kitchen and multiply that 5 times in an airport where there is a much better solution? And, you know, we've worked during COVID to develop those types of solutions, and we've got a couple that, if it wasn't for COVID, they would be live, where we've been able to reduce the total space of F&B or that F&B precinct by about 25%. You know, with the same offer, the same number of units, the same menus, and obviously reduced capex. And why that's important is airports now have the opportunity to repurpose that space. They can use it for additional F&B. They can use it right now for social distancing, or they can repurpose it into entertainment precincts or more retail. And the other thing, the airport operator, which I hadn't appreciated previously, is they said, the other thing is it stops us from actually having to expand the terminal, which is obviously a very expensive exercise.
So if that reduced space delivers the same or more money, it's an absolute no-brainer for the airports.
It is a no-brainer, and that's why I think, why didn't I think of this a few years ago? So, but que sera. But I think the other thing that's exciting is the design and build techniques that we've used create flexibility, and we've developed this bespoke content management system that means you can change that coffee shop that's really busy in the morning to a bar in the afternoon at pretty much a flick of the switch. And that really increases the utilization. And it also means that you don't have operators that have a coffee shop that's humming in the morning going, I've still got to man this in the evening, and not many people want a coffee shop. They've moved on. They want a cocktail, or they want a beer, or they want something else. And I think that the ability to convert and flip in and out of concepts also provides that great opportunity to bring local in, because it removes that massive capex up front. And when I've spoken to downtown operators, that is their number one fear. It's a big capex in an environment they don't understand.
Yes.
So anything that we can do to eliminate or reduce or mitigate that concern, I think is a great solution for the industry.
One last question, Kevin. If there were three things that you wanted to tell the viewing audience about digitalisation and innovation, what can and should be done in the foreseeable future, what are they? What would they be?
Number one, Peter, is to embrace it. You know, the consumer of 2022 and 2023 is not the same consumer as 2019. I've said it before, anyone who tells you differently is lying or living in the past. There have been fundamental changes over the past 2 years. Number two, don't be afraid to fail. You know, we're all entering into this environment where you've got to test and try things, but be prepared to fail and fail quickly. Procrastinating is the worst thing in this new digital age. And the third thing is seek help. You know, engage people who know about this. I've seen some airport operators, some very big retailers seek internal help, and they've done some left of centre hires, or get external help. I think as an industry, we've got to move away from we know everything to let's collaborate, let's get new people in, and let's try and propel this industry forward to the glory days again.